let's talk about some news and notes heading into the pay-per-view. Right after WrestleMania in April, WWE has a rash of releases. This is back in 2005. You know, I've talked about this with Jim Ross, and WWE was doing the same thing in 2000 and in 2010 and 2015. It feels like April is sort of release month. And I don't know how long that's been the case. When do you remember WWE first adopting we used to hear back in the day that Vince, Bruce, and Pat would book like WrestleMania to WrestleMania. When you get through with that set of stories and it's time to set a new course for the next WrestleMania and develop a new set of stories to get to the next year, that makes sense. If you're going to do what Jim Ross would call a roster purge, what's the thinking, and when did this become part of the process for WWE?
Well, with any corporation, I think every year, every 6 months or so, you have to evaluate your resources and you have to evaluate your entire company. And that's what we did. You have to look at your productivity. You have to look at if there's any dead weight hanging around, or if you need to cut, if you need to bring people on. You know, you don't get any publicity when all that happens. But when you cut, it seems to get a lot of publicity in the negative. So it's just taking a look at your corporation a couple times a year and realizing that you either need some strength over here or you need to eliminate some. So that's all it was.
Wade would write Matt Hardy, Molly Holly, Rhino, Chili.
I told you I just woke up. Sorry.
Jesus Aguilera and Paul Bearer were all released from WWE this week. It wasn't part of a systematic and planned post-WrestleMania house cleaning, as each of the wrestlers whose tenures with WWE ended last week did something to prompt action. Most of them have 90-day no competes, meaning they cannot work elsewhere until mid-July. Hardy was the biggest surprise of the bunch. Hardy was always on the verge of the chopping block in the eyes of some members of management, but was saved because of his relationship with Lita and the good crowd pops he received. Hardy had been one of the most outspoken WWE wrestlers when the WCW crew arrived. He rubbed the incoming members of WCW management the wrong way, most of whom have since risen to power, including Arn Anderson, Fit Finlay, and especially John Laurinaitis. Hardy gave management who weren't that high on him to begin with, and held a grudge for his anti-WCW stance after the merger, the excuse they were looking for to unload him. While there are some strongly differing opinions, everyone in power felt he didn't have enough main event potential. If they felt they had to choose between Hardy or Edge and Lita, they sided with the latter. Edge, who had heat in the locker room with his colleagues for breaking up Hardy and Lita, now faces increased animosity, since it appears at least that contributed to the departure of Hardy, a fixture of the tag team scene with his brother since the late 90s wrestling boom. So pretty monumental set of releases. No, not talking about Chili Willy, but Matt Hardy. This is something that gets a lot of attention. We've talked about this sort of triangle romance and all the drama and fallout very early in the Something to Wrestle archives, but let's touch on it again here, because this is a new piece of information that I saw in my research, that perhaps he had rubbed some of the WCW guys when they came over the wrong way. And he specifically lists Arn, Finlay, and Laurinaitis. What can you tell us about Matt Hardy and his lack of bedside manner for these WCW guys coming in?
I don't think that had anything to do with it. And I think that is just something that was created out of a narrative for whatever reason. Unfortunately for Matt, the situation took place with Lita and the breakup, and instead of kind of going with it, Matt made an issue out of it pretty much with everybody, and it was unfortunate. So, it made it harder to do business. So when you look at it and you've got all these elements, and if you remove one element from the situation becomes better, then unfortunately that's what you have to do. And that, in a nutshell, is pretty much what happened to Matt during that time. I think that he took out his frustrations and his feelings on everybody and everything. Just wasn't a healthy atmosphere.
Lord, I know we're not talking about current stuff here on the show, so I want to make that clear because that's something we agreed when he went back we weren't going to do. But it's written here that maybe management never saw Hardy as a main event guy. They didn't think that he had main event potential, but they did see that for Edge. And of course we know what Edge went on to accomplish. Whereas Jeff did have some top of the card runs in singles action. That never really happened in the WWE for Matt Hardy. Do you think that was the case his entire run, that for whatever reason, Vince just didn't see him as a main eventer?
Probably so. I think that, if you look at the two, Jeff was a star. Jeff had the charisma. Jeff had that it factor, and Matt was a little bit more of the cerebral of the two. As time went on, I believe that for those that knew Matt and knew both of them early on, you would say that Matt was going to be the star and that Jeff, Jeff will have a decent career. As time went on and Jeff kind of came out of his shell, it became the opposite. But they're both just highly creative and they're both damn great talents. It was Jeff whose star was shining the brightest at the time, and a little bit harder to find a place for Matt's to shine.
It does feel like this is maybe one of the first times that the internet plays a big role in what you guys are trying to do. Because the Matt Hardy release is a major topic online, and it becomes, something that even takes over the shows a little bit. Whenever Edge would come out in England, there are thunderous boos and chants. We want Matt. We want Matt. And then maybe some that said, you screwed Matt. But when they're chanting, we want Matt, Edge doesn't know where to go from here. I mean, it's overwhelming. So he mouths, well, you're not getting him. They don't even bring Lita out to the crowd because just thunderous boos. So in a weird way, there's this grassroots effort that Matt's doing online and rallying fans behind him. But just this news, he sort of becomes the sympathetic baby face, and he starts doing media and says things like, management is, quote, closing their eyes and hoping this goes away, but that's not happening. And all of a sudden you guys are faced with, hey, did we make a mistake? Was there money in this and we just didn't see it? What do you remember, feeling and the office mood being when this all happens? He's gone. All right. The train keeps on rolling, but wait a minute. The fans aren't done with it yet. They want more of this.
Well, I think that, it wasn't, at least for me, it wasn't as you said, the internet backlash. It was, maybe it was, but it was definitely the reaction live in the arenas,
right,
where people cared. And it was also natural story. It was so, it was real, it was natural, but neither one had shown any desire to take their real life and turn it into a story. And sometimes from the outside, if you if you pitch a different way of looking at it, people will listen a little more. And I was on the outside. I was in Texas. I wasn't in the bubble, so to speak. So it was real. I mean, I remember Kurt Angle and Jeff Jarrett in TNA, and I pitched that the first time when I got there, and I was told that will never happen. There was a little old lady in Dallas, Dixie Carter's mother, that would never let that happen. I said, well, is she afraid of making money? Is she afraid of good story? What's the problem? And eventually we did it. This was kind of the same thing in that I didn't have to live it up there all the time. I was in Texas. So I would come to TV and I got that instead of living it day in and day out of whatever controversy that there was.
Right.
I was just looking at it on the outside, looking in, going, well, put them in the ring together and blow this story up and tell the truth and enhance it, you got something there.
Absolutely.
And there was not a desire, as we talked about in the whole love triangle in our other show. There wasn't a lot of desire with any of them to do it until it got to a fever pitch and realized, well, if Matt would come back and if Edge and Lita are willing to jump on board, this could be a hot issue for everybody involved. And phone calls were made and everything was done. And I had to have that wonderful meeting with them in the back of a limousine, and everything worked.